Hi everyone, thanks for joining us tonight. Just wait a couple more minutes and make sure everyone can join and see and hear us all properly. There's just a couple more people trying to join into the audio, so I'll just give them a chance for that to work. All right, we might get started. So yeah, welcome everyone and thanks for joining us for our webinar, Introduction to iNaturalist. My name's Claire Warren. I'm the Manager of Environment Sustainability at Baw Baw Shire Council. And I'm really excited for tonight because it's sort of a launch for Baw Baw joining the 2023 Melbourne Biodiversity Blitz. It's the first year that Baw Baw have joined in with the other councils for Biodiversity Month, which is September. So I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians and carers of country for all the various lands on which we are situated on tonight. So I personally am on the land cared for by the Bunurong people of the Kulin Nation, but obviously we're all on different lands tonight. I pay my respects to all those who've cared for country in the past and now and in the future. Just a bit of housekeeping. So we are recording the session. We're happy for you to turn off your videos if you don't want it on for the whole session. We ask that you please stay on mute for the session. And if you've got any questions or comments, please use the chat feature. We've got Gemma here from Baw Baw Shire who's monitoring the chat, and we'll respond to comments and questions in there. And we'll also have a bit of time at the end where we'll facilitate some of the questions that have been put in the chat if we've got time for questions and answers. So I'd like to welcome Lewis Matter, who's running the session tonight, and thank him for his time. Lewis is a lead research scientist. He has a Bachelor of Arts in Economics, a Bachelor of Science in Biology, a Master of Science in Biodiversity, and a PhD in Entomology and Insect Ecology. He's an ecologist and entomologist with an interest in complex systems, sustainable agriculture, urban environments, citizen science, and science communication. He is fascinated by insects because he believes that whether as individuals or aggregated into superorganisms, they are interesting, valuable, and beautiful life forms. He's conducted his PhD research at the University of Barcelona and is also an alumni of Santa Fe Institute. He enjoys discovering and learning from nature through photography and is convinced that capturing aesthetically pleasing images of living beings is one of the best ways to bring art and science together. I'll pass over to you, Lewis. Thank you.
Oh, thanks, Claire, for the introduction. Thanks, everyone, for being here tonight and joining us in this iNaturalist webinar. It's a true pleasure to share with you some of the things that I have learned along the years by being an avid iNaturalist user, and especially in this time of this Melbourne Biodiversity Blitz. It's a really exciting time during Biodiversity Month to capture records and contribute to biodiversity knowledge in your Shire or Council. So let me start by sharing my presentation. Hope it's all there and everyone can see it. Yeah, excellent. All right, so Melbourne Biodiversity Blitz 2023. I wanted to start with pointing right now at the project within iNaturalist, and we'll talk about this in a moment, where this big project of the Melbourne Biodiversity Blitz sits. And just as you can see today, this is a very exciting moment, right? All the summaries are set to 0 because the event hasn't started, right? And this is kind of like a really fun kind of page to keep in your radar and hopefully on your screens during the next month, because you will see how all of these numbers will start changing, right? And maybe later on, I'll show you how it looked for last year so you can get a sense of comparison. But I'll show you how to get this in a moment. Now, I just want to give you a brief outline. We'll try to cover these 7 points here throughout the talk, briefly each one of them. And hopefully by the end, then you will feel very comfortable using iNaturalist and you feel very comfortable contributing to the Melbourne Biodiversity Blitz. And of course, I'll stop a few times. I definitely encourage you to pop any questions about anything that I say in the chat, and then we'll get to discuss those because we're a relatively small group. And I think you can make most out of it if you're just curious and you ask me anything. So that'll be really great if you use the chat for that. All right, let's start with this idea of big data. I think it's just a little way of saying why I believe, or hopefully how can I communicate that this idea of participating in the BioBlitz with iNaturalist is such a great idea. So this is exactly, for those of you, you know, and if you don't mind sharing in the chat a little bit of how familiar you are with iNaturalist, if you're a first-time user, or if you're very comfortable with already. But you know, this is how the first page of iNaturalist looks like. And the first thing that is striking, right, is to just kind of get a sense of how many millions of observations have been already made around the world using this technology, right? So over 150 million observations, and you can see here in the map, it covers the whole world. And Australia is well represented, especially the southeast. So that's really encouraging, and we'll be contributing to this kind of big data of iNaturalist. But I think it's also important for people to know, for you to know, that all of this data, when properly curated and kind of like your photos identify and all due process, they flow, so to speak, to this other bigger, larger repository of Australian biodiversity data, which is the Atlas of Living Australia. So in the Atlas of Living Australia, then, just for Australia, we have 125 million records. And a lot of them, a big proportion of these records, increasingly so, are contributed by iNaturalist and events like the Melbourne BioBlitz. But taking that a step beyond, right? There is a global information facility for biodiversity that is holding about 2.5 billion records. And so the map becomes much more impressive, right? This is an actual map where each little single dot here in green is a biodiversity record collected somewhere around the world. And you can see here that it's pretty big. So again, I just really encourage you to think that every time that you're contributing a record in iNaturalist, it's not just in the first instance for the BioBlitz, right? But it ends up here in this global information. So you are making contributions as scientists to this big picture idea. And I find that really fascinating. So that's just a little bit of big data. I want to show you now, for those of you who are new to it, how you will become a member of the iNaturalist community. So this is it, right? In its most essential way, iNaturalist operates as any other social media type app. You will need to register with your email and your preferred username, and remember your password, of course. So then you just follow these very simple steps, and that's it. You're signed on. So my recommendation is to do it both in your computer, so in the website, and then use the same details to then do it on your phone. And that way they will both be constantly syncing each other. And I think most of you, it's kind of very organically expected that you might be using your phones to collect the photos. And I will explain other ways of collecting records too. But if you're using your phone, then by these two, website and phone being connected, then everything works really smoothly. And you can use, then, very importantly to highlight, you use exactly the same sign up details. So yeah, that's as simple as that. Now, something that I would love to highlight about, and I'm going to toggle live now to the web. That's what I just did. So I am online now, and this is my real screen showing you how iNaturalist works. So I can share with you a few things, well, about me a little bit, so you get a sense of how many records, observations I have made, and how exciting to think. I always highlight this with my friends, is that all these observations for me personally mean that I have somehow, right, seen or being close to or being in the proximity of almost 3,000 different species. I know that we all hear that the world has 1 million species, 10 million species, whatever that number is, right? Sort of after all these observations, this is sort of how close I have been exposed to, kind of like close enough or enough to take a photo to some of these species, right? And of course, this will be different for everyone, and that's the beauty of it. But also it shows how many people I have interacted with, right? So almost 2,000 people have somehow seen my photos, somehow contributed something to it, told me it's a plant, it's a beetle, it's a bird. So it's really interesting, this kind of social aspect of the platform too. So having said that, very briefly, I just want to show you, for those of you who are new to it or weren't aware of this, I just click here, the iNaturalist icon, and then it opens my profile. So if you see the tab here, profile, and it's just an invitation to kind of like use this. You can use this edit button here to write a little bit about yourself. It's really good to know, what do you like to do? What kind of taxa you're familiar with? What's your background? It helps people connect with you, kind of understand if you make an identification, for example, and you are very familiar with a plant of a given area. If that's reflected in the profile, people will say, oh, that's so incredible. I interacted with this person who has plant expertise or is good with beetles or whatever that might be. So yeah, it's just a little bit of sharing, and it's a really interesting social platform. And I think it's a very, very good use of the social engineering, social technology, probably the best in my opinion when it comes to this kind of social media aspect of it, or social networking aspect of it. So I'll leave that there for now. There's all kinds of things that you could play with, but I think the profile is probably the entry-level one that it's most interesting. And let's dive directly into making observations. So let's start with the basics, right? When is this kind of webinar encouraging us is to actually participate in the Melbourne Biodiversity Blitz. And so that's going to happen all across September. And I was just highlighting to Claire before how Baw Baw, right, takes about half of the area of the actual extent of the whole collaboration, which I think fascinating to think how people who have been participating in this for 2 or 3 years in the other councils now have a challenge. They can open up and go explore this beautiful area of Gippsland. So yeah, some challenges in the sense that some areas are a little bit more remote than others, but still a lot of area to play with all around this. I think it's 11 councils that are participating this time around. And then here's what I was trying to refer before, this idea of conventional or phone camera. So you can do both. These days, as you can see here, I'm more used to this approach of taking photos with my conventional all digital camera and then uploading the photos later on at home, maybe a week after, sometimes a month after. Obviously, during a blitz, I will try to do it during a reasonable time. But it's equally valid and sometimes so much easier just to make observations with your phone. And then the advantage of that is that if you're in range of internet, then they'll be uploaded immediately. And so it flows quite easily with the phone as opposed to with the camera, but both options are equally valid. So here's just a slide to show you a little bit, for those of you who are new to this, how easy it might be to make an observation. So as you can see, this is how the app will look in your phone. There's a very kind of self-explanatory icon that says observe. And when you click on it, it will allow you to either take a new camera photo or to search your old photo albums for a photo. That's also too. So if you're new, you can start uploading your old images stored in your phone. And say you choose the live photo. So this is me in my garden. I found a whale in my garden of all things. And I thought worth taking an observation of this whale in my garden. So I did. And then as you can see, the little photo opens then this interesting kind of like first stage of curation of your record, and it shows you that you have taken one image. And then if you're doing it with your phone, obviously then immediately you get the location where the photo was taken, date stamp and timestamp, and other things. And then you can immediately share it, right? The moment you share it, this is the act, right? Like within days, it becomes a biodiversity record in the Atlas of Living Australia and in the Global Information Facility. And we'll discuss a little bit more about how it's ID'd later on by the community. Excellent. So I might stop here for a moment and see whether there's Gemma and Claire, any questions about this kind of first stage?
No, nothing yet. Everyone's just intently listening, I think, Lewis.
Excellent. All right. Well, if you have any questions, please just pop it in. I thought that some of you might be thinking, well, what if I have multiple observations in the same moment, right? And we'll discuss the advantages of that. And actually, I will encourage everyone to, as a share core principle, always try to take more than one image of it within the same observation. So if you're using your phone, that's what this plus little within the square is about. So it's like you've done the first observation, it takes all your data, and then you just click it again, and then you take a new photo, hopefully from a different angle and or a different perspective, or a different part if the animal is big. So we'll touch base on that in a moment. Okay, so now that you're there at that stage that you're taking photos, then this is just a couple of slides for me to kind of share with you, sort of in a nutshell, what I have learned myself and learned from others, and actually advice that is probably given quite directly in the iNaturalist kind of like reference guide. And it's this idea of get closer, get different angles, and get the frame and the focus right. So I guess if you're a, like a natured photographer, you probably be used to this idea, but let's see how that looks like with a few examples. So the idea of getting closer, right? It's really interesting. Some people will have a tendency to immediately go to the detail, right? They will see a plant and they say, oh, I like beautiful fruits, and take a details of them, and I'm going to upload that as a record. That's brilliant. But then for those of you who are so inclined, I will suggest take a few steps back and make an observation of the plant more in its habitat, right? And that way you get, for that person who has expertise with plants, it would help him or her guide the identification. Same goes with if you have the flower details or the fruit details. Maybe with the mushroom, it's about taking a photo from the mushroom from above, and then also trying to take a photo of the mushroom, get really close and take a photo of the gills from below, right? So yes, this idea of, don't be afraid to get closer and capture the detail. And as I was saying before, different angles, right? So, maybe you are lucky and you capture this moment of the interaction between the bee and the flower, and that's great. But you can wait just a little bit more, and the bee will move, right, very naturally to collect the pollen and the nectar, and then you'll see the abdomen of the insect. So you take a second photo, and that way you have a different angle of the animal. So in a nutshell, right, whether you know a lot about a given taxa, so a given type of animal or plant or mushroom, it's always a safe guideline to say, just take different angles, mix it up, and that very likely will help with identification later on down the track. And it's so many instances where the experts or the taxonomists, right, they come back with a comment and iNaturalist saying, oh, do you have a photo of this? And you're like, oh, I would have taken it, but I didn't know that detail was important. So that's good too. That's how we learn. And this one is particularly important from my point of view. If we are concentrating on a photo, I think it's important to sort of make a decision. What are you photographing, right? If there's two things, like in this case, you could be taking a record of the plant, goes without saying, and that's great. You have the details of the fruit and of the leaves, but it also turns out that there's a little insect in it. So for the insect point of view, it's much preferred to have this image on the right, where you have details of the animal itself. And so in this particular group that I know really well, I would have been able to identify the image on the left to family level, but with the photo on the right, I can also do genus level. And so just with that change of frame and focus, I can get a much clearer identification. And I think that's safe to say that that applies to potentially all groups that you might photograph. So yeah, just think about that framing that main point, and then uploading potentially the record of the plant separately than the record for the insect. So each individual thing in its own little observation. And then just really briefly, so for those of you interested in audio files, it's now possible to upload records. And I think most phones now are working for this feature. So instead of selecting camera, you will select audio, and it will open a microphone, and you record it with your, and I love it because now I can just hear a frog crawling in the back, and I record it, and then I'll learn exactly that connection now with something I can't really see, but I can feel it from the audio perspective. So a really good feature. And it's good to know that this is also an option. Okay, so let's move into curating. What does this mean, right? So I think I use the word curating because, as I said, I'm really conscious of how this is kind of like the 21st century way of making a museum grade record. And so in a way, then the same way that in the old way you will curate the specimen, here you want to curate your observation. It's unique to you. You're the owner of this observation, and you want to curate it as best as you can and then pass it along, right? So let's see how that looks. All right. So what I would like to do now is go live again here. And actually, I have gone back to 4 photos that I took at Baw Baw National Park early this year, last year. I can see the date here. So about a year ago, right? Oh, actually, it would have been a Melbourne Biodiversity record if Baw Baw had participated last year, right? So it was exactly 1 year ago. And so what I did was basically here, and sorry, I toggled back to this page. I clicked upload. Okay, so that's when you're ready and you have your photos ready to upload it in your computer at website version, you click upload, and then it opens this screen. And I previously pre-uploaded these files with, so quite big. So I pre-uploaded them here. And I want to show you how it starts, right? Let's start from scratch here. And the first thing I'm going to do is select the 4 of them. So using Shift and clicking, you can select the 4 of them, for example. That's one way of doing it, okay? And so now that they're all selected, because this was not done in my phone, I have to go to location. So I'm going to click location here. So I'm doing this all live, right? So you can see how quite simple it is. And now, as I said, I was in. So as you see, as I type, iNaturalist is already trying to help me find that location. And that's all I need to type for it to come back to Baw Baw National Park. So obviously it's very closed in, zoomed in. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit back. And all right, so I'm going to safe to say that's sort of within that area that I remember walking and taking these observations. Now you can see here how it provides all the details, including this. If you have questions about this, ask me later, but there's options to kind of like not be so open about the privacy of the observation, and you can obscure it or make it totally private. So say, for example, you believe that the observation you're making is from something that could be potentially endangered or something that is rare or potentially vulnerable, endangered. You can obscure that observation to prevent the exact location from being disclosed. So it's still a valid biodiversity record, but only you or potentially your colleagues within a project will find out the exact location. In this case, I'm just going to do open, and we'll see how these observations are now up ready with their location here. Okay. So now I'm going to submit my observations. Hopefully you're all with me there. It's telling me that there's some missing data because I haven't done that curation. So it's warning me, you should probably think more carefully about how you're curating your records. You haven't provided an identification. All right, that's it. So that was as quick as that. They're all uploaded now. And what I like doing then is then going to my observations here. So I'm going to click my observations over here. And I'm going to select grid, which is the easier way to visualize them when they're nice and fresh. And then they are. You can see that my last 4 observations and my previous observations from Sunday down here. All right, so like I now am clicking on the first observation, and this is exactly what I mean by curating something. It means different things for different people, but I'll do it live here with you as I would do it. So the first thing that I want to do is kind of immediately suggest for me what I believe this is. And this is a really fun part, right? Because you can go and say, some of you are thinking, I know what this is. I know exactly the name of this thing. Or you might think, well, at the minimum, it looks like it's an animal, or is it a plant, right? I have a difficult one here because I'm pretty sure that it's not immediately straightforward to everyone. So actually, if someone knows in the chat what this is, I'll love to hear, and just feel free to let me know. What I will do though is go to here, and I am very positive, right? And that's important, very positive that this is a mushroom. So a fungi. So I'm going to type fungi, and iNaturalist helped me find how they categorize a fungi and name it. I click that, and I'm done. Okay, so now at the minimum then, I have curated my record because I have provided a location. I did that before. My camera lucky gave me the date and the time. Second step. Third step, I have provided an identification. And literally, this is an international standard for museum quality curation. Date, time, location, and some kind of identification to start the conversation, right? Hopefully what will happen down the track is that someone with knowledge, expertise, training in mushrooms, fungi will help me with this one, and potentially, hopefully, to species. Do I see, Claire, by any chance, someone with the identification?
No, nothing as yet. No identification.
All right. Well, maybe we all right. So it's all good. So I'm going to click the arrow here, go to the next one, so we can see another example. So yeah, what do we have here? So I think I put a little tricky ones, right? It's not immediately straightforward. Hopefully some of you are seeing an animal here, right? Like it has legs, it sort of has face, a head, a tail. So fair enough. Let's imagine that that's perfectly valid animal. So I'm going to type animal. And here it is, animals. So that's good. All right. Now, say imagine you do animals, and then shortly after a colleague, your partner, your friend tells you, oh, it's definitely an insect, right? I believe that, I'm certain that looks like an insect. Okay, good enough. So you just, whenever you understand and are very certain that this is an insect, or you have someone tell you it's definitely an insect, then you can change. And then it just basically then moves along and starts that search for the species level. So in this case, I am quite certain this is a beetle. So I'm going to type beetle, and I'll leave it at that. So with my level of kind of confidence, I want to curate my image, my record down to beetle level. And really interesting, there's other things that you can do here in the annotations for some of you who are going to more like detail oriented or like that kind of like aspect of providing more details. You can play with these too, right? So I can safely say this animal was alive. I saw the organism as opposed to say the molt. I also know this is a juvenile because hasn't developed its wings, so it's not an adult, it's not an egg, it's not pupating, so it's a larvae. So, and about the sex, I have no idea, right? And generally larvae don't have clear sex things to identify. So I'll leave it as that. And this is another example of curating an image. I'll do one more, and then I'll show you a record that's already been identified by others. Actually, let's do that. So I'm going to go back to my observations. Hopefully that aspect of curating your images is clear. And now I want to go to this one. Perfect. Example from Sunday, right? So this is a photo that I took on Sunday here in Melbourne. And I want to show you, will I be able to show you? Yeah, right. So as you can see, I took this photo on Sunday. And then very shortly after, I even had time to come home and say, this is a plant, or this is a flowering plant, which is something that I would have known. Someone came along really quickly and provided, a community iNaturalist member provided the genus level. Really quickly, someone was playing with iNaturalist at home and said, oh, I know what this is, a plantain, beautiful, and helped me out with that identification. And then shortly after, someone else came along and say, oh, I actually know the species. So gave the species level identification, and then someone else shortly after provided the second species identification. And with that, the record becomes research grade, which is one of these attributes that is necessary for the record to flow into the Atlas of Living Australia and to flow into the Global Information Facility. It's this idea that it's already been identified. So that's happened here with this community taxon approach, where you need 2/3 of the community to align their identifications. And so it could be a very lengthy process if people don't agree what the identification is. Sometimes that happens, but most of the time it's people who are very certain, and that happens. Let me see if I can give you one more example. I think this is an interesting part of iNaturalist. So here's a whole bunch of records. Let's see if we can. Oh, all right, there's 3 identifications here. Or let's look at a bird example for it. Oh, let's mollusk. So here by the beach, I took this identification here at the shore. Oh, this is in Newcastle last week. I traveled for work to Newcastle. I did a little walk on the beach, and I took records of these, yeah, sea life, seashells, whatever, right? Like at the time, I didn't know what they were. And then someone then identified it to genus, but then decided to withdraw the observation. So said, no, I don't feel comfortable, so withdrew it. And then a few iNaturalist community members came and provided the identification, and so it goes to research grade. So that's sort of how it flows, and people in the community contribute to the identifications. Let me go back to the presentation. So in a nutshell, we have covered then curating, uploading, curating, and also what happens to your observations. So in that sense, that once you have done your minimum curation, then that's when the whole big iNaturalist community starts playing and identifying, discussing, and hopefully there will be a lot of this happening during the Melbourne Bio Blitz, right? Because a lot of people are paying attention to this event, myself included. And so, for example, I always go once a week during the event and check all the insect observations, and then contribute my knowledge of my limited knowledge of insects in the area the best as I can to provide help people with kind of like moving forward their observations until they become identified to species if possible. All right, so I want to show you now, almost in this last 7th point, how you would potentially, if you are keen, join this project. So obviously, if you're here, obviously, I think you're already keen to participate and to use iNaturalist, but I can show you how to go one step further and then actually join this project within iNaturalist. And then you can start kind of like tracking a little bit more how the event is progressing. So maybe I'll start from scratch here. So imagine you are in your iNaturalist webpage, and then this time around, you go to community. See, I'm hovering over community, and you have projects. So once you're there, you just need to use the search bar, and the keywords here are biodiversity Blitz, Melbourne 2023. And then iNaturalist finds that project for you. So you click there and you just have to click join. Oh, sorry, up here, I already joined, so it's asking me whether I want to leave. So, but for you, it will be join if you haven't joined before. There's 11 people already joined this particular event, but I'm sure this number will increase quite substantially as the event progresses. And so there's really interesting things about having this page open during the events. That way you can see the leaderboard, of course. So these numbers obviously will change. Hopefully not right now, they're just alphabetically, but hopefully Baw Baw will stay up there too with all the great contributions that will happen. But it's sort of a game, right? Like every observation will contribute one kind of observation here. And then it will also map for you where these records have been collected in the map. So you can go and actually spatially see where the records have been collected. And at this stage, because I want to show you how it looked, I said I will try to show you how it looks from last year. So I think I can do that quite easily by going to projects. So these are all my projects. I'm just trying to find Biodiversity Blitz from 2022, the summary. It's Monash. It's probably in the next page. Yeah, here it is. So we can have a little bit of a look at how things looked last year, and then you can kind of set yourself some really interesting targets for this event. So last year, there were almost 30,000 observations done during that month, and they contribute over 3,000 species. So that's really quite incredible, right? Like as I was saying, I've been doing this quite a few years, and I haven't even, so like the whole community has seen over 3,000 species, and over 1,000 people contribute identifications made by almost 900 observers. So these are kind of like the stats from last year. Hopefully this year they'll be increased. And as you can see here, this is a little bit of how the competition went last year. So obviously, Yarra Ranges somehow had some clear advantage here, and potentially it has to do with the range and like, or it's easier potentially to find different things to photograph. In my experience, I found that that's important too. Sometimes you spend an hour in a very biodiverse place and you take heaps of observations. Some of the time you spend 3 hours in an area that is not so rich in diversity, and it takes a little bit longer to kind of accumulate different species. So that was just for the number of observations. When it comes to species, yeah, it's kind of, again, really interesting to see. So I'm really curious to kind of like imagine how Baw Baw is going to do this year, and I'll be following this quite closely to see your contributions. All right, well, that's for me. I'm happy to leave quite a few time for answering questions, and we can go into any kind of level of detail. But as iNaturalist says, happy iNatting, and I hope you enjoyed the talk, and I really hope that you enjoy the event and make heaps of observations. So thank you.
Thanks, Lewis. That was yeah, really great overview of how to join and all the fantastic things that we can do. We've got a few questions that people have put up in the chat, so happy for me to start with those. We had, what happens if you take multiple photos of the same thing? Are they uploaded as separate observations, or do you group photos of the same thing?
Yeah, excellent question. Very important question, actually. So thanks for that. I'll go back here to show you again. This is how the app looks after you've gone through the process of taking selecting camera and making an observation. And then you will have this square here with a plus sign inviting you to make multiple observations of the same, so multiple photos within the same observation. So the idea is that, as I was saying, you can take photos from different angles, different perspectives, closer, from above, from below. So yeah, I really invite you to use this feature. And you can have 100 photos if you want within the same observation. You can also just have one, but ideally you will have multiple ones. So yeah, it's definitely an invitation to take multiple photos for the same observation.
And that flows on to the next question. So someone's asked, can you upload a photo and an audio for the same observation? So would it be the same thing when you click on that plus sign? Can you add an audio file as well?
Oh, I've never, let me think how that would work. Actually, I'll try it right away. Why not? So I'm taking a DOM observation here. I'll use the photo so I can answer that question. And then I click the plus sign. Yes, absolutely. So when you click the square with the plus, it will go back to this slide here, to this feature here, where then in the version that I used this presentation, it wasn't there, but it will be there in your phone to add then a record, an audio record to a photo record. Yep.
Yeah, great. So if you see something and can hear it as well, you can record an audio and upload the photo and the audio to the same observation. Great.
Yeah, yeah. And in a related note, what some people do, which I find really interesting, I've never tried it myself, but I hear this really useful, is if you are more the classic photographic camera, people then make a black observation, so a photo observation of nothing in particular, maybe just the habitat or the area, and then they go back and then use the photo in their camera, and that way they already have all the spatial location, the date, the time, and it makes it easier to upload that potential record that didn't come from the camera.
Yeah, cool. What have we got? If Geo Privacy is set to private as opposed to public or obscured, does that mean it's not counted as part of the Blitz or for research?
Yeah, that is correct. So that feature is there to allow people to benefit from all the technology in a private setting. So you might as well have a project, My Garden Biodiversity. And you can use the platform, you can use the technology, you can create projects, you can play with it as much as you want, but no one will know where these observations are. They're totally private. Yeah. So that's not a feature. Using the private feature is not something that would actually benefit, say, an event like the Melbourne BioBlitz. Yeah.
Yeah.
I will then suggest, if that's an issue, to use the obscure version, the obscure category or option, which will then really create a mask of hundreds, I think, well, at least quite a few kilometers around the record, and it makes it literally impossible for anyone to know where the actual location was.
Yeah, so just further to that, someone's asked, when you set it to obscured for potentially rare or threatened species, what level of location accuracy is applied by iNaturalist to the record?
Yeah, I forgot off the top of my head right now, but it's enough to mask it. So it would still, sometimes if you want to be, say, even in the context of the Melbourne BioBlitz, it might be that the record was in the Yarra Ranges and it shows up as being in Monash, for example. So when it comes to counting, it will confuse things a little bit because it potentially could. So yeah, in a sense, it's not ideal for something like the BioBlitz to obscure because it could place it in a different location. But from the point of view of conservation or precaution, it's really good. It would definitely mask the location.
So someone's asked, what if you take multiple species in the same location?
Well, yeah, so it's very frequent to find yourselves at a given location, and at least I'm thinking of the way that I normally have contributed, right? I might go to a national park or a green space and spend 1 or 2 hours there, and then I'm always thinking, what if I start taking every single last observation of this plant that is very common here? that probably doesn't make much sense, because I'll end up with 50 records of the same species in the same location at the same time, the same day, approximately. So, but this varies from people to people. So what I tend to do is say, in a given location, I'll take a photo of observation at least once of the species. And then if I see it again, I'll pass, to prevent over uploading observations from the same locality and date. But that could vary a lot, right? You might find that the first time at the beginning of the walk, the plant was not in flower, and then you take an observation, great, and then towards the end, you see the same species in flower. I think it's worth then taking that observation again and making a detailed photo of the flower and uploading it again. So at least then you're contributing something new. That also applies if you were walking a very steep walk, then maybe the species at the lower level, and then you go all the way to the top and you see it again. That's that kind of interesting, that difference of altitude could be interesting and worth taking a second observation. But again, everyone have their own creativity. So I think yeah.
But I suppose if you've got if you're in like one reserve and you're seeing lots of species, then you should be logging them as separate observations, to just demonstrate how biodiverse that particular location is, if you're seeing lots of different species at the same time.
Absolutely. So I mean, so just again, to make it kind of like a personal story, if I go to a place, I would start thinking, well, I hope I will see 100 things here, right? And normally when you set yourself to a target, you normally meet it. Like you say, I'm going to take 100 species before I leave in this national park. And easily after an hour or two, if you pay attention to the different things, you're very likely to get to those numbers.
While we're still talking about location, someone's just asked, if you're observing things in your backyard, will your exact address come up? I suppose for privacy issues, people aren't wanting people to be able to find them on a map. How exact is the location?
Yeah, no, that's right. So, well, like satellites these days are very accurate. And normally in urban settings, as soon as you turn the app on, it will map to the meter where you are. So yeah, if that's a concern, then maybe obscure it in that option that I showed you before. If that's a concern, right, it will then solve that problem. When you are out and about in more remote areas, sometimes the accuracy of the satellite is not that good. So I find that sometimes you can see it when you go back and curate your records. It will show that circle around the location, and it's very uncertain. It's like even a kilometer or more. So that depends on how accurate the satellite is in the precise moment that you take the observation.
I think too, just from my experience using it as well, even though you sort of got the photo as the with the geolocation on it, you can slightly move the map as well, especially if you're using the app on your phone. So you could always sort of adjust the map and put it out on the street or something if you didn't want it specifically over your property.
Absolutely. Yeah, you're right. That's never thought about it. I mean, you could then just exactly that, just offset it to the nearest, whatever, and then expand the circle, and then it's still within the same street, neighborhood, but it doesn't give away your exact house, or garden.
Yeah, I suppose the other thing with privacy too is you can have a username that doesn't necessarily identify you as well. So people aren't going to know that it's you either.
Yeah.
Just having a look through to see if there's any others that are different. There was a question around is how do you find other people's observations to try and identify their photos?
Oh yeah, sure. That's a good one, and it's one that I normally don't get into detail because it's a whole world, but I'll show you. That's really good. So I'm back in iNaturalist, and then we move into the fourth big tab, right? We went into explore, your observations, community, and then you have this identify. So this opens a whole bunch of really, really interesting features. Right now, it's looking at the most recent observations in Australia. So you have two kind of filters, the species filter and the location filter, and then heaps of other filters. So in your example, let's say I'm going to do insects here. I'm interested in insects. So I toggle that to insects. And I want to do, let's say, for example, the western areas of Baw Baw. So I click go, and here is, let's see how many, 28 pages of insects, Baw Baw West, that I can contribute identifications, or I can have a look. So normally what I will do is go into the first one, and then it opens this feature here, and then I start playing around, right? So for example, I don't know this species at all. I wouldn't be able to corroborate this identification, so I move forward. This is an interesting one, right? Because two people are saying two contrasting identifications. So that's why the actual identification that we see is it's neither one or the other. It's the top level, and in this case, superfamily. So these two people agree that this is a typical crane fly, but they don't agree on the identification. So iNaturalist leaves it at this top level. If you knew what this was, you can then just agree here, for example. Let's see if I can do that for one. Very interesting observations here that I'm not familiar at all with. So you can see I'm just gonna, this is an interesting one. So this person originally would have done what I would have done, say this is a butterfly caterpillar, and then somehow learned a little bit more about it, found about it, read a book, a guide, and then ID'd it to species. Oh yeah, so beautiful comment by an expert about the details, taxonomical details, and how that person arrived at the genus level. So a good example of a really science kind of like discussion happening in the platform. All right, so for example, here I am familiar with this darkling beetle enough to kind of agree with, and that's why that's my contribution. So I agree to genus level. It could have been that I agree to species, or anyway. I hope that helps with that aspect of one really good aspect of how to play with identifications.
Yeah, and I think once the projects start and you start seeing some of the observations come up, you can just go to the map and click on them too, and then that'll take you to the observation, and then you can
yeah. Well, I probably should have mentioned that you can go into projects directly here. So if you go into filters, more filters, then in project, then you go into, see what's there before. Yeah, so I'm going to use the one from next year as an example, but obviously you'll be selecting 2023. And then let's say you don't really, you want to do it for the whole umbrella. So now it's limited into those records made from last year. And maybe now these will be in quite a good advanced state of identification, as you see. But normally halfway through, there will be heaps of opportunities to contribute identifications here if you have the right knowledge for it. So 88 pages you can play with.
Yeah. Someone also asked if your observation hasn't been identified, does it still count towards the biodiversity blitz?
Excellent question, and one that is kind of like interesting. I do my best to try to convey this idea. What happens is that, say for example, let's be particular to Baw Baw Council. If you make an identification of a butterfly, right? That it remains at that very top level of a butterfly, okay? And no one else finds any other butterfly to say genus or species level, then that identification of the butterfly will count as a species, because it's kind of saying, this is the best that we know. This is something quite unique and no one knows any more details. So that will count as one observation of a butterfly as a species. If anyone else finds another butterfly that is identified to species, say the cabbage white, then your observation that remains to be identified and was only identified to butterfly level will not count as another independent record, because there's no way for the app, for the technology to know that that record is not just the same cabbage white, and it doesn't want to count it twice. So that's why every little bit of progress in the identification helps untangle these kind of like uncertainties around when something is not identified to species.
What about, so before, I think when you were making an observation, you chose that you'd actually seen the animal or the insect or whatever. What if you saw like habitat? So, yeah, as an example, great Gippsland earthworm, you might see evidence of their burrows. Can you record things like that?
Yeah, that's really good. I'll try to mock up a little bit of that, how that would look. So let's say I go back to my observations here. And I'm just gonna, oh, look, how interesting, right? Like since we, and really timely, since we were here a few minutes ago, my fungi remains fungi, but someone has ID'd my beetle to genus. So that's quite cool. And the worm, the millipede to family level, and the snail to family level. That happened just in the time of the webinar. So that's how quick things can progress. And this is not even the BioBlitz, right? When people are actively, so quite interesting. All right, so I'm gonna say, for example, let's imagine, for the sake of argument, that this snail here was not alive, was not the actual snail slowly moving, but it was just the shell, right? So let's imagine that you find the shell, you pick it up, it's empty, you know that it was just the shell, the animal is not there, but you still want to record it, right? So yeah, fair enough. You put it somewhere where the light, then perfect opportunity to kind of place it in the place where it's easy to photograph, sort of fairly close to where you found it, if you can move it, or if it's advisable to move it at all. And then in the annotations, you do evidence of presence. So then you might say, okay, I did find the organism. So in the case of the snail, they don't have the option for shell. They consider that that's part of the organism, fair enough. But you could also have done the scat or the track. So these options are going to vary and change depending on the top level identification. And there's, I guess, some rules there of what goes into those options for each kind of level of animal or plant. Yep. It'll be interesting to find a record of the giant earthworm, huh? Just by its evidence of its burrows. That would be great.
Awesome. Well, I think, yeah, we're almost on time, so we might wrap it up. I'd like to, extend my thanks to Lewis Matter. It was a really great presentation. I learned some new things, even though I've been using iNaturalist and have been involved in the Biodiversity Blitz in past years. We're really excited that Baw Baw's joining in this year, and hope that the community gets behind it and gets involved and gets out there and doing some observations. I'd like to thank everyone for attending, and thank you for your participation with the questions. Really gets the conversation going as well, and the people raise questions that you might not have thought of, but it's something that will help you when you're participating in the Biodiversity Blitz. We'll send out an email to anyone who's registered and everyone who's attended today, which will have links. You've probably seen them already, but links to our biodiversity page and how to register for the Biodiversity Blitz. There's other things on the journal page of our project. There's going to be another event webinar next week, which is hosted by all the Melbourne councils, where you can hear from full community members who have used iNaturalist, and they can talk about projects they've been involved with and their experiences and how they use it. So hear from other citizen scientists. And yeah, we just encourage you to get involved, get your families involved and your friends, go out for a walk, just record anything that you see, and have some fun with it. It's really enjoyable to you know, really start to notice things that are out there just in your backyard, or if you go for a walk in a reserve. So and keep track of how Baw Baw's going, and we'll see how we go against the other councils. So thanks everyone for attending.
Thanks everyone. Thanks Claire. Thanks Emma.